Okay, I'm going to just summarize the criteria that we look at when we make the conclusion from a chi-squared test. And just a reminder that, of course, we're testing the null hypothesis, H0, that A and B, the two things that we're looking at, are independent. So the null hypothesis is that they are independent. And I'm going to decide whether or not to reject that or accept that. Now, as you know, there are two ways in which you can do this, either using the chi-squared values or using the p-value. And in either case, we have a problem with the null hypothesis if the difference between the observed and the expected is too big. And chi-squared, remember, measures how big the difference is. So with the chi-squared conclusion, there's a cutoff point which is called chi-squared crit. And if my chi-squared value goes past that, then I reject. So in this case, if my chi-squared calc becomes too big, then I reject H0. So for the chi-squared one, it's if the chi-squared calc becomes bigger than chi-squared crit, I reject. For the p-value, I need to understand what the p-value actually tells me. Now the p-value is the amount of area left at the end of the curve. So the bigger the chi-squared value, the smaller the p-value. So in this scenario, I have a problem. There's a big difference if the p-value is really small. So to reject, I will reject if the p-value gets really small. If it gets smaller than the number I compare it to is the significance level. So to reject, I'll either reject if the chi-squared calc value is too big or the p-value is too small. So if you like, that is the way I remember how to make my conclusion. And of course, to complete that, if the chi-squared calc value is too small, the chi-squared calc is smaller than the chi-squared critical, or if the p-value is too big, is bigger than the significance level, in that case, I'm quite happy to accept H0. So those are my criteria for accepting or rejecting. Now I can never remember those unless I have the understanding of what's happening. So I always need the pictures to go with the steps there. But essentially, again, if we just summarize that with one last thing, I'm basically going to reject the null hypothesis if chi-squared calc is too big or if the p-value is too small. And if I can remember those, then I'm going to be able to make appropriate conclusions to any of the questions that I face.